So when buying, really, I have broadly three types of heifers that in mind. Your farmer will often use the term they're looking for a heifer with power, for example. So that's probably the first type. So to translate then we're talking about an animal with a great frame, good bone, good strong thick legs. She'll be wide and long and maybe average muscling, not too extreme.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc beef podcast for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode I'm joined by beef farmer Michael Cunniffe from County Roscommon, runner-up of the Grass10 Drystock category, to get an update on his beef system and upcoming open day, along with his local Teagasc advisor Charlie Devaney. Michael and Charlie, you're very welcome. Michael, before we get into the grassland management on your farm, can you give some background to listeners as to what beef system you operate?
Really what we do here is we supply top quality replacement heifers in calf to the suckler herds around the country, really. And the aim here is to grow the heifers to the potential on a grass-only diet. So we would turn over the herd typically every year in the autumn, and heifers then are sourced both privately and through the marts. And the key then is we sell them all at home, then out of the field, farmer to farmer, really. Customers then all over the country, really, north and south, but the majority of them will return to your Whelan producer in the western seaboard. So we're talking Roscommon, Galway, Mayo, Leitrim, Clare.
And what are you looking for, Michael, when you're sourcing them heifers?
Yeah, there's probably no one type, Catherine, to suit all suckler farmers. And, there's a bit more variety than you might think. And it can be surprisingly polarized at times. So when buying, really, I have broadly three types of heifers that in mind. I suppose your farmer will often use the term they're looking for a heifer with power, for example. So that's probably the first type. So to translate then we're talking about an animal with a great frame, good bone, good strong thick legs. She'll be wide and long and maybe average muscling, not too extreme. And they're your typical kind of cemental or well-framed Limousin or Limousin cemental crosses. And they'll probably have the greatest calving ability, and they might typically go to your weaning producer who might be crossing with a Charlie bull, for example. The majority of them will still be U-framed, U-grade animals, really. But we will have some exceptional R-grade heifers that might go to your Belgian blue weanling producer who is looking for a bit less muscle but a well-framed animal. The opposite end of the spectrum then is probably a very well-muscled, light-boned heifer. And they're probably your Belgian blue or your well-muscled Limousin heifer. They'll go then to the specialist weanling producers, and they might be targeting a kind of a show calf, for example. So it can be quite polarized, in terms of what people are looking for. The third type then is probably your Teagasc recommended type heifer, your typical functional heifer, wide pelvis, good calving ability. And that farmer then will be really focused on your EBVs, so milk, fertility, temperament. She'll be deep body, not too extremely muscled, but a nice bit of muscle at the same time. Your Limousin cross heifer, really. And they tend to go to the larger herds who might have less time in their hands for calving.
They're kind of characteristics, Michael, you'd be looking for in any heifer, really. Obviously, easier calving is important, really, and the sires that you're selecting for putting on these heifers. What are you looking for in the sires that these heifers are putting calf to?
Yeah, so we use all Limousin stock bulls, pedigree Limousins. And that's a part of the business, really, I have to work hard at, both in terms of sourcing the genetics and matching the heifer then to the bull, really, for in order to get the best outcome. So that's key, really. And the last thing a farmer wants to see is a difficult calving after buying a heifer. And at the same time, they want to see a top quality calf running around the field for the rest of the year. So it's a balancing act, really, Catherine. And most people will be familiar with that kind of balancing act. But I do need to be a little bit cautious with what I'm at here in terms of sire selection. So we keep 4 Limousin bulls. They'll all be suitable for heifers, all but low calving EBVs, all 5-star and myostatin tested. So the big framed heifers, for example, now they might be put to the more well-muscled bulls. So I have a Roundhill Saturn Commander cross bull, or we have a Commander Cerberus cross bull. So on this kind of a heifer, then those calves will be born small, they'll grow fast, and they really do make exceptional animals. And then the other extreme, then the more muscled heifers, they'll go to either our mid-sized bull, he's a Queen Sodality bull, or we have enough Highlander cross bull. Now he's a bigger frame, but he's less well muscled. But I suppose the four bulls together, then it gives great versatility, and we're able to match the heifer then to minimize the calving difficulty and balancing the calf quality at the same time. So that's really a key part of the business, Catherine.
And how do you run them heifers with the bulls, or what size groups do you operate?
Yeah, so with the four bulls, they kind of dictate, really. We'll have four groups during the breeding season. When breeding is finished, then we can knock them down to three. We have an out farm, so one group will run out there, but at home, then we might have two groups of 50, then we'll say this time of year. I did try putting them all together in one big group one year, but it doesn't really work. They don't behave like a herd of cows, really. Back with the herd of cows, they were very disciplined. They nearly had an order going out through the gaps, where young heifers are jockeying for position the whole time, and they'll all run out together, and they'll bring fence and straining posts and everything together. So really two groups at home, one group on the out farm. So maybe groups of 50 maximum.
Perfect. And once they're in the group, then how often are you rotating them from paddock to paddock?
Yeah, so the paddock system, we are rotating every couple of days. So there is a bit of work on that, 3 groups, and they are moved every couple of days. Yeah, and that's key then in terms of keeping good grass in front of them then going forward, maximise the growth rate.
And then can you talk through, so once you source the heifer, how are they managed on your farm once they arrive until they're sold, really?
Yeah, so I suppose when they come in first, we give them a few days to recover from the stress of the sale, really. So they'll either go into a dry house, or if ground conditions are good, they might go back out to grass. And once they're recovered, then we'll start with the wormer and the first of the vaccines. And over the next 6 weeks, then they'll get a barrage of vaccines, really, between lepto, BVD, IBR, the other pneumonia vaccine, as well as your typical fluke and lice treatments. They're wintered then on a silage-only diet. You're looking at maybe 69 minimum to 72, 73 DMD silage. We'll start with the best quality silage first. And turnout varies a bit, depends on ground conditions, like most farms. It tends to be ground conditions more than grass supply that'll dictate when they get out. If we get out in late January or early February, I find that they'll probably be housed again between then and sometime in March. Breeding groups, then we'll prioritise the breeding groups for turnout rather than the lightest first, because that kind of dictates the priority here. And we'll begin breeding then around the second week in January. So if we can get out then, we will. And we'll slowly build up then to around 150 heifers running with the bulls by about the 1st of May. So inevitably, some, getting out that early, there will be some damage done. But there'll be a lot of in and out as well, Catherine. There'll be sort of on-off grazing going on as well. But we'll have targeted underperforming paddocks then in our reseeding programme, and they'll be the fields that we'll call them our wet day paddocks. And they'll be reseeded then when the ground dries up then as the summer goes on.
So you're really kind of matching your system to how you're managing the grazing in the spring. I suppose gaining as cheap weight gain as possible from grass is very important to you, particularly for that system. What are the key things that you're doing to maximise performance of the heifers?
Yeah, well, I suppose the paddock system, that enables me to run a high stocking rate. And I suppose in fairness, I didn't begin that now. I grew up with that, and it was in place here on the farm, put in place by my late father in probably the 70s and 80s. And he was probably ahead of his time, really. But even then, we're still refining it and improving on it. Soil fertility has been key, and it's been a pricey one. So if you look at the overall system here, we purchase very little in terms of straw, silage, and grain. So inputs are minimal. So it's all fertilizer, really, to that's our primary input to replace the exported kilos of live weight out the gate. So P&K then is the constant battle. But in order to manage that, then we soil sample at least every other year in order to try and keep on top of it. But we're in a good place now, but it has been a long road. Clover, we began, when I began farming, it was about 12 years ago now. I put a lot of emphasis into clover. But I made all the classic mistakes and I eventually gave up on it. And as my stock and rate grew, my fertilizer inputs grew. So nitrogen, I wasn't reducing the nitrogen as much as I should have. P&K inputs was increasing the likely of docks in the grass, and I was putting them in silage swards, and then they'd spray and it'd be gone. So I gave up on it for a few years, and then I kind of came to the work of James Humphreys then the last couple of years. There was exciting stuff coming out there. And there was renewed emphasis from your own colleagues there in Teagasc through Grass10, the newsletter and the Clover reporter and that. And I was keeping an eye on that. So together with the price shock that took us all there in terms of nitrogen prices, we decided to give it another go. So last year, we kind of raised our pH. Our 2022 samples would have come back at kind of 6 to 6.5 pH. So we lined again then to rise it somewhere between 6.5 to 6.8, to have them, a bit more friendly to clover going forward. So this year then, the first of the high clover swards went in. So the target there is 0 nitrogen. So we put in straight grass swards with 4 kilos of clover as well as multi-species. So it'll be interesting to see how they go now over the next year or two.
And how are they performing at the minute, considering the difficult summer weather we've had?
Yeah, so I've only had a couple of grazings on them, Catherine, because we ended up reseeding them quite late, later than we expected, given the weather conditions. It takes a while for them to dry out here. And when they did dry out, we got the grass clover sward in early. And we've had a couple of grazings off that. And it's doing fine, actually. So I was able to target it, during dry periods. The multi-species, then, we left that for the weeds to germinate because you can't use a post-emergent spray, as you know. So we sprayed it, cultivated it, got it ready for sowing, and then left it alone for a few weeks. Let the weeds germinate again, sprayed it off again. So we ended up sowing it. It ended up being a long, protracted kind of method, but at the same time, it's clean. We don't have weeds in it. Small bit of creeping thistle, but docks and red shank and all the typical weeds are under control. So it's looking good. It's looking good for the future. So so far so good.
That's great. And I suppose you mentioned there, since you started farming 12 years ago and now as runner-up of the Grass10 Drystock Award, what do you think are the main changes that you've had to make on your farm over the past number of years?
Really, I suppose we began with pasture or the paddock system really, and getting that refined and up and running. And then when I began, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be perfectly honest, and we didn't really know where the farm was. So in order to get a handle on, where we were and what the potential was, I basically started to measure everything. So we were measuring grass from nearly day one, and really, sowing slow incremental changes then on the soil fertility side of things, that's a pricey one. Regular reseeding, that went on, different grass mixes. And I would have began with a suckler herd rather than the current business. So we had a lot of different experimentation and different crosses of cows. We would have AI'd them and seen how they went, and steady improvements really on all fronts, really, I suppose.
Michael, you've mentioned there all the improvements you've made in relation to soil fertility and clover reseeding paddocks. Going forward, what do you think are the areas that you need to focus on, both the challenges and opportunities that you see coming?
Yeah, so I suppose steady improvements on all aspects, but we have been focusing out on the land for a while now, and there will be renewed focusing around the yard now and that infrastructure there over the next few years. The focusing on the grass and the cattle was that's where our return on investment was, and so now it will be in around the yard. But that said, There's really exciting stuff coming out now on the red and white clover, and the data coming out on that is really positive. And I'm interested, a lot of questions still to be answered, and we reseed anyway every year. So they'll be going in as red and white clover swards. Hopefully the 2 kilos of red, 2 kilos of white. I'm keeping an eye on what's going on in Solahhead. We haven't put any red clover silage sward only in yet, because really we need that versatility, Catherine, in terms of being able to get a grazing off in the spring and have all the farm back again in the autumn. But there is a sward there where they're putting in red and white, your typical perennial ryegrass with inclusion of a hybrid grass. And if you can graze that, then that's something I might experiment with in the near future as well.
That's great, Michael. Thanks very much. And Charlie, you've seen all this progress over the last number of years on Michael's farm, and there's an open day coming up on the farm. What can farmers expect to see at the open day, and what can they learn from Michael's farm?
I suppose the first thing is his breeding is highly impressive. The heifers he has, the quality of them. We had a group out there last year with Michael, and there literally spent time just even looking at the heifers of very, very impressive groups of heifers. Michael can correct me on this, but you're talking about probably in around 140 heifers going to the bull. So, and I know, as he said, they're split into 3 different groups, but very, very impressive animals. But also, along with that, I suppose his grassland management is huge. Again, probably as good a grassland farmer, or one of the best grassland farmers I'm dealing with. Exceptionally good, really, really into it. Always looking for new and innovative ideas. And I think Michael's fertiliser bill over the last number of years has been quite high. And as he mentioned already, he's met James Humphreys, and he's gone down to meet them down there in Solahhead, and looking at what they're implementing down there in a white clover and grass clover. So he's looking to push that onto his farm. So that's something we'll probably discuss on the day as well. So you're looking at the breeding, you're looking at the grassland management and quality, but you're also looking at red clover and white clover going forward. And for any farmer that's anyway highly stocked, or even say organic farmers going forward, that's going to be very, very interesting to see how we can either get away without using fertiliser or reduce your fertiliser bill. And you can see from an environmental point of view, that's going to be huge. It is huge, and it's going to get bigger as time goes on. So I think even from Teagasc's point of view, I suppose we're living and learning with these farmers. And this whole new area, has become more and more into focus over the last few years. So I think it's going to be highly important for the likes of Michael to pioneer that kind of stuff, and for farmers then to use Michael as a local farmer, that they can see what works and doesn't work in the local area. So I think that part of it is going to be very, very important as well,
Most definitely, particularly with the high costs on farms, and really coming down to the bottom line on Michael's system. So farmers can look forward to attending the walk in Mount Prospect, County Roscommon, and that's coming up on Thursday the 31st of August at 6:30, and I'll include the link for further details in the podcast text. Thanks very much, Michael and Charlie, for joining me on the show.
You're welcome, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Michael and Charlie for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.